The air inside Denver International Airport's Concourse C was sharp with the smell of jet fuel and overbrewed coffee. Overhead, the loudspeaker barked boarding announcements in a clipped monotone, while wheels clicked against the polished tile and the buzz of hurried business travelers filled the space like static. Then came the tear, sharp, deliberate, final. A gate agent in a navy blazer stood rigid, a torn first-class ticket trembling between her fingers. Across the counter from her stood a tall, composed black man in his mid-50s, dressed not in designer flash, but quiet confidence. Tailored overcoat, clean lines, a steel grey scarf resting at his collar like a statement of control. She didn't know who he was, but she assumed he didn't belong, until he slid his business card forward, smooth as a chess move. DeShawn Miller, Chief Executive Officer, Olympus Cyberdynamics. The woman's expression shattered in real time. Passengers behind him fell into silence, some leaning forward as if watching a courtroom drama. Phones paused mid-scroll, time slowed. Because in that instant, this wasn't about a seat number. It wasn't about airline policy. It was about how fast someone's value could be judged, or misjudged, based on their skin, their silence, or their suit. And DeShawn Miller, he wasn't just reclaiming his seat. He was about to redefine who gets to belong in first class, in the air and far beyond it. The morning sun sliced through the glass walls of a penthouse perched high above downtown Denver, casting long shadows across a space that looked more like a showroom than a home. Sleek, minimalist, curated, but cold. It was the kind of space that spoke of power and polish but whispered nothing of comfort. In the center of it stood DeShawn Miller, barefoot on heated floors, cradling a mug of black Sumatra roast he barely tasted. At 55, DeShawn had scaled the corporate Everest. Olympus Cyberdynamics, the billion-dollar security firm he'd built from the bones of a failing startup, now had contracts with the Pentagon, Wall Street, and half of Silicon Valley. He was, by every public metric, the embodiment of American success. Sharp, relentless, undefeated. But lately he was also awake before dawn for reasons that had nothing to do with ambition. He gazed at the Denver skyline where the light bounced off steel and glass like coins scattered across pavement. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, there was a familiar ache, a quiet, gnawing absence, the kind that crept in slowly after too many years of postponing life for the next milestone. He hadn't spoken to Layla, his daughter, in weeks. She lived in Portland now, knee-deep in a PhD program in computational ethics, changing the world on her own terms. Their relationship, once tender, had frayed into polite updates and missed birthdays. And while she never said it out loud, he knew she carried the weight of his absences. The science fairs missed, the recitals never attended, the silence that followed every "maybe next time." The penthouse echoed with stillness. No laughter, no footsteps, just the distant hum of an espresso machine and the click of his assistant's overnight email. Flight confirmed to Seattle. Car arrives at 7 a.m. Meeting with KinetIQ Systems, 2 p.m. DeShawn nodded to no one in particular. The deal was important. KinetIQ's proprietary AI protocol could revolutionize Olympus's government applications. If the acquisition closed, it would be a legacy move, strategic, visionary, exactly what the board wanted. And yet, he moved through his routine like muscle memory, push-ups on the mat beside the window, a quick steam, a charcoal suit pressed sharp as a scalpel. But the mirror didn't lie. The man staring back had silver threading through his temples and lines, etched deep from years of clenching too much between his teeth. At 6:58 a.m., the elevator chimed. He grabbed his Tumi carry-on, checked the time, and whispered into the quiet, "Let's get this over with." But as the doors slid open and he stepped into the corridor of polished marble and filtered air, DeShawn Miller had no idea. Today's flight wasn't about acquisition, it was about reckoning. About realizing that sometimes, the higher you climb, the easier it is to forget what home feels like when there's no one waiting inside. The black Lincoln Navigator purred curbside, its chrome grille gleaming under the rising Colorado sun. Jameson, his driver of nearly a decade, stepped out in pressed slacks and a navy windbreaker, the picture of quiet professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," he said, opening the rear door with a nod. DeShawn offered a faint smile and slid into the back seat, placing his carry-on beside him. The leather seats still had that faint cedar scent, a holdover from the custom detailing. Jameson pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the early Denver traffic. "Should be clear down I-70 this morning. We'll have you at DIA by 7:45. DeShawn murmured his thanks and turned to the window, watching the city drift by in slow, reflective fragments. Joggers in Cherry Creek Park, a kid on a scooter chasing the tail of his mother's coat, a mural of George Floyd, half faded by sun but defiant all the same. Denver had changed, or maybe it was him. His phone buzzed, unknown number, Portland area code. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Dad," came the tentative voice. Layla, his daughter. His heart caught somewhere between guilt and gratitude. "Layla," he said, straightening instinctively, "is everything okay?" Yes, I just wanted to tell you. I got it." A pause. The seconds stretched. "You got what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "The grant, for my project. Full funding. I'll be working with the Indigenous Language Institute on an AI tool for endangered dialects. We're partnering with MIT. It's huge." DeShawn's throat tightened. He looked out the window, composing himself. "That's incredible," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks." Another pause. "I thought you might want to know." "I do, I really do." They exchanged a few more lines. Dates, congratulations, the promise to talk more soon. When the call ended, the silence in the car returned, but it was different now, charged with something unspoken. He stared at the screen for a moment longer, then tucked the phone away. As they pulled into the departure lanes at Denver International, a flurry of movement outside caught his attention. A young man, skinny, early 20s, hoodie too big for his frame, was hurrying along the sidewalk, juggling a laptop bag and a boarding pass. He knocked on the window just as Jameson parked. "Mr. Miller?" DeShawn stepped out slowly. "Do I know you?" "Evan Brooks," the young man said, breathless. "I'm a new associate in R&D. I heard you're on the Seattle flight. Mr. Patel said I should shadow your trip. I'm here to observe the Connect IQ pitch, if that's okay." DeShawn blinked, slightly irritated but intrigued. "Did anyone tell me this?" "Ms. Grant said she cleared it with your assistant. I have the email if you want." DeShawn studied him, eager, nervous, a spark of something familiar. "All right, Brooks, you've got one shot. Don't waste it." Evan's face lit up. "Yes, sir." DeShawn nodded toward the terminal. "Let's get through security. The real pitch begins before takeoff." The terminal buzzed with early morning chaos, baristas shouting orders over the hiss of milk steamers, children tugging at tired parents, suits marching toward gates like soldiers with rolling luggage. DeShawn and Evan had cleared TSA with little trouble, their pre-check statuses fast-tracking them through a maze of blinking scanners and belt removal rituals. Gate C-22 was tucked near the end of the concourse, flanked by oversized windows that spilled morning light across the glossy floors. Boarding hadn't started yet, but a line had already formed, early boarders clutching their phones, priority passengers rehearsing their authority. That's when DeShawn heard the voices. Not loud, but sharp, coiled. Controlled only in the way people speak when they know the world is watching. A black couple, mid-40s, professional, well-dressed, stood across the counter from the gate agent. Between them stood a teenage boy in a crisp hoodie, shifting uncomfortably under the attention. His name, Isaiah, was visible on the ID badge clipped to his backpack. "I'm sorry," the agent said, her smile brittle as glass. Her name tag read P. Callahan. "But the name on this boarding pass doesn't match the ID." "It's clearly a typo," the father said, measured but firm. "The ticket says Isaiah, no second A. His ID spells it correctly. It's the same boy." "Sir, the system requires an exact match," Callahan replied, not looking up. "This could be a security concern." The boy stared at the ground, his knuckles whitening around the handle of his carry-on. The mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "We've had these tickets for 2 months," she said. "We're flying to Seattle for his northwestern visit. He's been accepted to their pre-engineering program." "I understand," Callahan repeated, eyes flicking to the growing line behind them. but you'll need to go to customer service to rebook." The father inhaled deeply, but said nothing. Anger was dangerous currency in places like this. One wrong tone, one raised voice, and the whole narrative could flip. DeShawn stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Callahan looked up, her expression instantly defensive. "I'll be with you in a moment, sir." "I don't need service," DeShawn said, "just a moment of logic." He turned to the family. "You've already cleared TSA?" "Yes," the mother replied, cautious. "No issues there." He nodded, then faced Callahan. "Then we can all agree that the identity has been confirmed through federal documentation. The discrepancy on the ticket is a clerical error, not a threat to national security." Callahan stiffened. "With respect, sir, this doesn't concern—" "It does," he said, producing a card from his wallet and placing it firmly on the counter. Her eyes fell on the words, DeShawn Miller, Chief Executive Officer, Olympus Cyberdynamics. And for the first time, Callahan blinked, twice. DeShawn leaned in, voice low. "This boy's name isn't the threat here, but rigid thinking. That just might be." The air around Gate C-22 had shifted, no longer the casual bustle of boarding, but the tension of a room holding its breath. The Wilsons, grateful but still shaken, stepped aside with Isaiah clutching their newly printed boarding passes. A few nearby passengers gave quiet nods of approval. Most turned back to their phones. DeShawn checked his watch. 9:04 a.m. Boarding should have started. He approached the counter next, placing his documents down with practiced calm. "DeShawn Miller," he said, "First class, seat 2A. Gate agent Patricia Callahan gave a quick glance, her posture still bristling from their earlier exchange. She began typing, too fast, too forceful. She murmured. "That's odd. It's showing you're booked in seat 17C, main cabin." DeShawn raised an eyebrow. "That's incorrect. I booked first class, confirmed via the app. I'm also a Platinum Executive member." She didn't look up. There must have been an aircraft change. There wasn't. He pulled out his phone, tapped open his reservation. Confirmation code ZT45-KN9. Seat 2A, first class, paid in full. Callahan peered at the screen. Then, without warning, without a word, she reached down, picked up his printed boarding pass, and tore it clean in half. A sharp, audible snap. Gasps flickered from passengers nearby. Even Evan, standing off to the side, stiffened. "I'll issue you a corrected pass," she said flatly, already reaching for a fresh slip of paper. DeShawn didn't move. He didn't speak. But something in his stillness said more than raised voices ever could. "You tore that," he said, voice steady as iron, without confirming with a supervisor, without acknowledging verified documentation. "You didn't do that with the Wilsons' ticket, despite their issue being nearly identical in nature." She faltered, just slightly. "Sir, I was just following protocol." "No," DeShawn said, "you were following an assumption, one you've likely followed before, one that tells you men who look like me belong in 17C, not 2A. The terminal had fallen almost completely silent. Someone behind them had pulled out a phone. Recording. Quietly. "I suggest," he continued, "you enter my frequent flyer number, AXE275490, into your system and try again." Callahan hesitated, then typed. Her face shifted almost immediately as the screen repopulated. Platinum Executive, 2.6 million lifetime miles, first-class confirmation, VIP status, all green. DeShawn watched the color drain from her cheeks. I apologize, Mr. Miller. There must have been a system—" "There was no system error," he said, cutting gently. "There was a human one." He slid a second card across the counter, gold embossed, heavy with truth. DeShawn Miller, Chief Executive Officer, Olympus Cyberdynamics. The name landed like a gavel. Behind him, the Wilsons exchanged glances. From her seat, Isaiah stared. Not at the business card, but at DeShawn. Like a witness to something unspoken, finally made visible. Patricia's fingers trembled slightly over the keyboard. "I'll reissue your boarding pass immediately." DeShawn nodded once. "No need to rush. The damage is already done." The reprint slid from the gate agent's printer with the soft hum of a machine oblivious to the weight of the moment. Patricia Callahan picked it up with both hands now, her movements careful, reverent even, as though the act could erase what had just unfolded. "Your new boarding pass, Mr. Miller," she said, voice low, eyes no longer meeting his. DeShawn accepted it without a word. He didn't need the apology she couldn't quite bring herself to give. The real apology wasn't a sentence, it was what came after, whether silence deepened or awareness woke. And that wasn't something she could hand him across a counter. A new figure approached from the left, moving with the brisk purpose of someone called in late. "I'm Vanessa Morris, gate supervisor," the woman said, her tone clipped but not cold. "Mr. Miller, I've been briefed. On behalf of the airline, I want to sincerely apologize for the handling of your boarding." DeShawn studied her, mid-30s, measured eyes. She looked like someone who had walked tightropes in customer service long enough to know when a fire had already started and how to contain it. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," he said, "but I'm not interested in formalities." "Understood," she replied. "Is there anything we can do to make this experience right?" DeShawn paused. "Actually, yes." He turned slightly, motioning toward Evan Brooks, who had been standing just behind him, clutching his laptop bag like a life raft. "This is one of our R&D associates. He's flying to Seattle on Olympus business. I'd like him upgraded to first class." Vanessa blinked. "We'll make it happen." "And," he added, glancing toward the Wilson family now seated quietly along the wall, "I'd like 3 more upgrades for the family who was nearly denied boarding because of a typo." The supervisor hesitated, eyeing the manifest on her tablet. "First class is nearly full, but—" "I imagine," DeShawn said calmly, "a few seats might suddenly become available." There was no menace in his voice, just the weight of someone who knew the system and its levers. Someone who had learned over decades how to nudge without shouting, how to command without breaking decorum. Vanessa nodded once. "I'll see what I can do." As she moved to her task, Evan stepped forward, wide-eyed. "Mr. Miller, thank you. I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing," DeShawn replied, placing a firm hand on the young man's shoulder. "Just be ready to use the seat well." A few feet away, Isaiah looked up from his phone, caught DeShawn's gaze, and offered a small, unsure smile. DeShawn returned it with something stronger: recognition. This was about more than upgrades, more than seats. It was about sending a message. That dignity isn't granted by rows or ticket class, it's carried. And sometimes, when one man lifts his voice calmly, a dozen others are lifted with him. The wheels left the tarmac with a gentle jolt, and the plane tilted skyward, its nose slicing through morning haze as the Rocky Mountains fell away behind them. Denver disappeared beneath a quilt of clouds, the city's noise and friction fading into silence. In seat 2A, DeShawn Miller reclined slightly, the smooth leather cool beneath his shoulders. The chaos of Gate C-22 felt distant now, like the echo of a trial already decided. Beside him in 2B, Evan Brooks sat straighter than necessary, hands folded over a closed laptop, unsure whether to speak. "You going to open that, or are we admiring it all flight?" DeShawn asked, his voice dry but not unkind. Evan blinked. "Yes, sir, of course." He snapped open the lid, launching a series of animated visual models. Encryption tunnels, neural map overlays, simulated breach responses. For a moment, the cabin lights reflected off his screen like a constellation of digital stars. "I've integrated KinetIQ's core protocols into a hybrid architecture," Evan began, finding his rhythm. "It reduces latency by 18% and strengthens anomaly detection without compromising compliance." DeShawn leaned in, eyes narrowing, not to critique, but to listen. The kid was good, hungry, but more than that, purposeful. "Why cybersecurity?" DeShawn asked suddenly, cutting through the flow of data like a blade. Evan hesitated. "Honestly, my parents had their retirement savings drained by a spear phishing attack when I was in high school. The bank said they couldn't recover it. It was legal theft, and no one paid." DeShawn nodded slowly. "So this isn't just code for you?" "No, sir, it's justice, digital but real." There it was, that edge, that deeper reason beneath the resume. DeShawn smiled faintly. "You remind me of someone I knew, Brilliant, impatient, relentless. Was he your mentor? No, DeShawn replied, gaze drifting to the clouds. He was me. Before the boardrooms, before the awards, before I learned how easily purpose can be traded for position. Silence settled between them, comfortable now. Across the aisle, Isaiah Wilson and his parents sat in row 3. The teenager was animated, pointing out features of the cabin with wide-eyed curiosity. His mother laughed quietly. His father, once tense and tight-jawed, looked at peace. It wasn't the luxury, it was the validation, the unspoken, "You belong here too." A flight attendant approached with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Miller. Sparkling water with lime?" He nodded. "Yes, thank you. And whatever my colleague would like." "Just water," Evan said, still stunned by the deference. "Please." As the tray table clicked into place, DeShawn glanced back toward the rear of the plane. Somewhere past the curtain, Patricia Callahan worked a different cabin, likely still processing the morning's reckoning. But up here, above the clouds, a different kind of processing was underway. Because sometimes the altitude doesn't just change the view, it changes the perspective. And for DeShawn Miller, something was beginning to shift. Not in the cabin, but in the quiet space between who he was and who he still had time to become. The Seattle sky was overcast by the time the plane touched down, gray clouds sagging low like thoughts too heavy to speak. A black town car waited curbside, its sleek frame gleaming with rainwater. DeShawn and Evan slid into the back seat, the city's rhythm pulsing beyond tinted glass. Construction cranes, electric buses, glass towers rising beside forgotten brick. "Are you ready for this?" DeShawn asked, checking his watch. 1:22 p.m. Evan gave a sharp nod. "We've got this." By 1:57, they stepped into the polished lobby of Kinet IQ Systems, a firm that had built its name quietly. Government-grade encryption, AI-assisted surveillance, military-adjacent contracts. It wasn't just a purchase, it was a doorway into the future of defense technology. They were led into a boardroom of straight lines and strategic tension. The Kinet IQ executive team, 5 men, all near retirement, all in identical Navy suits, rose with cordial reserve. At the center sat Howard Leland, Kinet IQ's founder, mid-60s, ice-blue eyes, a handshake that neither offered warmth nor withheld respect. "Mr. Miller," Leland said, "glad to finally meet in person." "Likewise," DeShawn replied. "This is Evan Brooks, our systems integration specialist." Leland's brow lifted slightly. He didn't question the young man's presence, but his pause spoke volumes. DeShawn launched into the pitch, smooth, strategic. He outlined Olympus's vision for merger, framed not as an absorption, but an elevation, Kinet IQ's legacy fused with Olympus's infrastructure and reach. He focused on retention, research freedom, and cultural preservation. But it was Evan who shifted the room. When given the floor, he pulled up 3D diagrams, mapping how Kinet IQ's encrypted nodes could dovetail with Olympus's adaptive threat matrix. He spoke with clarity, not arrogance, insight, not assumption. The CTO leaned forward. The head of operations began taking notes. Even Leland tilted subtly, intrigued. At the break, as coffee was served, Leland turned to DeShawn. "Your young man is sharp, but I assume you know we've had other offers. One from Archer Logic came in higher than yours." DeShawn didn't flinch. "Victor Brennan plays short games. He chases margins. I build frameworks. And yet your offer is lower. It comes with something Archer doesn't offer: stewardship. Your team stays. Your values stay. We don't gut what works just to please shareholders for 1 quarter." Leland sipped his coffee, studying him. "My father was a codebreaker," he said quietly. "Died before he saw any of this. I built Kinet IQ from a folding desk and a borrowed router. It matters what happens next." "I understand," DeShawn replied. "My mother taught public school in Baltimore for 40 years. She said legacy isn't about money. It's about what continues after you stop showing up." Leland blinked slowly, his defenses shifting. "Tell me," he said, voice lower now, "how do you define success?" DeShawn didn't hesitate. "When no one has to ask whether they belong in the room or on the plane." The deal was finalized 3 days later. Not because Olympus outbid Archer Logic, they didn't. Not because they promised a flashier merger, they hadn't. It was a handwritten note DeShawn left behind for Howard Leland, slipped beneath the closing binder. That made the difference. You didn't build a product, you built a principle. Olympus will protect both. DM. For once, respect had outweighed revenue. On the flight back to Denver, seated again in 2A, DeShawn didn't open his tablet. He didn't review market projections or write strategy memos. Instead, he scrolled through photos on his phone, pictures of his daughter Layla from years ago, her first science fair, a piano recital he'd missed, a birthday cake with a single candle and no father in the frame. Then he opened his calendar and blocked 3 weeks off. No meetings, no mergers, just a trip to Portland. Just time. Across the aisle, Isaiah Wilson and his parents caught his eye as they exited the plane. Isaiah had emailed him the night before, a copy of his facial recognition project proposal built to challenge bias in AI. DeShawn had read it twice and smiled. Back in his penthouse, the view hadn't changed, but he had. The silence no longer echoed as sharply. The room no longer felt like it was waiting for someone to return. He stood at the window with a tumbler of sparkling water and called Layla. When her voice came through, bright but hesitant, he said just 6 words. "I want to come see you." There was a long pause, then a soft, "I'd like that." And something fragile began to mend. 2 weeks later, DeShawn stood in front of a high school auditorium in Montgomery, facing 200 black and brown students, teenagers like Isaiah. Behind him, projected on the screen, weren't quarterly earnings or company milestones. Just one phrase: belonging isn't earned, it's acknowledged. He spoke not as a CEO, but as a son, a father, and a man who had spent too long measuring success in numbers instead of names. He told them about the torn ticket, about Isaiah, about Evan, about forgetting that power without humility is just decoration. And as he looked into that sea of young, determined eyes, he knew something for certain. The greatest seat of all wasn't 2A. It was the one where you reached back and pulled someone else forward. Because in the end, respect doesn't come from the logo on your card or the title under your name. It comes from how you use both. To listen, to lift, to lead, without needing applause. That was the legacy worth leaving. When DeShawn Miller boarded that plane, he thought the only thing that mattered was securing a deal. Closing Kinet IQ, expanding Olympus, adding another win to a long list of silent victories. But what he found instead was far more valuable than any acquisition. He found that the smallest moments, the torn ticket, the teenager with the wrong name on a boarding pass, the nervous young associate with a laptop full of dreams, those were the places where real leadership lived. Not in polished boardrooms, not in quarterly reports, but in how we treat people when no one is watching, in how we use our power when we don't have to, in whether we choose to correct or to connect. DeShawn could have walked away from that gate in silence, accepted the mistake, taken his seat and flown on. But he didn't. He spoke up, not for ego, but for principle. For the Isaiah Wilsons of the world. For Evan. For his daughter Layla. And for the part of himself that had once felt like an outsider in every room. What he did that day didn't just upgrade a ticket, it elevated a standard. It reminded every person watching that respect is not a luxury class perk. It's not tied to wealth, titles, or miles flown. It's a right and a responsibility. And perhaps most importantly, DeShawn learned something many people in power never do. That true legacy isn't the company you build. It's the people you lift while building it. So the next time someone makes assumptions about who you are, where you belong, remember this. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. You only have to stand in it. And when the opportunity comes, be the one who reaches back. Because sometimes the most powerful seat in the room isn't the one you're sitting in. It's the one you make space for someone else to fill.